Trump just threatened a massive new trade fight with Europe, and this one could end up affecting a lot of people, most probably than they can realize. So the issue centers around something called digital taxes. Several European countries have been trying to collect more tax revenue from large American technology companies, such as like Google, Apple, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft. So these are the companies they're trying to collect the tax, digital tax. So Europe argues that these companies generate enormous amount of revenue from Europe consumers and therefore should pay more tax in Europe. Now, on the other hand, Trump's response was super simple. He said that if countries continue targeting American technology companies with these taxes, the United States could hit back with tariffs such as high as 100%. Now, that sounds dramatic, but let me just break this down. What actually means by this? A tariff is basically a tax placed on imported goods. So if the United States place a 100% tariffs on the products coming from the certain countries, the cost of those products can potentially double before reaching American consumers. And that's where the problem really starts, and it gets more deeper. So many people hear tariffs and they think foreign countries pay the bill. That's what they think. No, but in reality, it often becomes much more complicated probably than what you think. So the companies importing those products usually face higher costs, and it's a pain for them. And those higher costs frequently gets passed on to consumers. So that means American can end up probably paying more on the product. And when prices rise, inflation becomes a concern in America. So the timing is important because inflation has already been one of the biggest economic issues in recent years, especially in the United States of America. Now, many families are still dealing with higher prices for groceries, for housing, for insurance, and for daily necessities. And that's painful. So the last thing consumers want is another source of price increases, right? But the situation doesn't stop right there. It becomes much bigger. So the bigger concern is what economists call retaliation. If US imposes major tariffs on European products, Europe may decide to respond with the tariffs of its own. Now, that's how the trade war really starts. So one side imposes tariffs, but on the other hand, the other side responds. So then the first side responds again. Before long, both sides are imposing restrictions on each other's economies. Now, we've seen this version a lot of times before. Trade wars often sound strong politically because they appear to defend domestic industries, but they can create unintended consequences on the normal public, and that is very painful. Businesses face uncertainty immediately. Supply chains become more expensive. Now, companies, they delay investments, and that will hurt a lot of people. Economic growth will slow down. Another issue is that Europe is not some small trading partner for US. Europe remains one of America's largest economic partners, as we all know that. So the United States and Europe exchange hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods and services every single year. And those are expensive products. So when tension rises between the two economies, so these are the large markets which we have to pay attention. So large companies, they pay attention. Investors, they pay attention. Governments, they pay a lot of attention. So that's why this story matters a lot. Now, let me break this down specifically about American technology companies. What is actually happening with this, with the Donald Trump? Trump argues that Europe is unfairly targeting American businesses. So from his perspective, these digital taxes are essential, aimed directly at the US companies. So there is some logic behind the argument because many of the biggest technology companies in the world are unfortunately American. Like the big names, if we have to talk, is Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. So these are one of the biggest companies in the world, trillion-dollar companies. Europe wants more tax revenue from these firms because they generate massive amount of money from European users alone. So the question becomes whether tariffs are the biggest response. Supporters, on the other hand, of Trump's approaches would say yes. That is the answer. And they argue if foreign governments target American companies, America should respond aggressively towards Europe. And that's how the things will become nasty. So their view is that strong pressure forces the other countries to negotiate on a fair deal. To be fair, trade pressure has sometimes resulted in new negotiations in the past. But on the other hand, the critics also argue that aggressive tariffs threat can create more problems than solution between these two major economies. So one major concern is business confidence. Large corporations like stability. They want predictable rules in the business. They want to know where investments will go in the future. They want certainty. They don't want uncertainty. So when governments start threatening large tariffs, uncertainty increases instantly, and uncertainty can slow economic activity instantly. Companies may postpone expansion plans, whatever, probably they are trying to do something bigger for the normal people. Hiring may slow down. Investments probably get delayed. A lot of people will lose jobs. Market can become more volatile and expensive. Another concern involves America's international relationship with other countries. Now, the United States and Europe have worked together for decades and decades on security, defense, trade, intelligence, and diplomacy. But right now, we are standing on a totally different situation. The relationships have probably never been perfect between the US and Europe. So there have always been disagreement, a lot of disagreements. But many experts believe that growing economies conflict can gradually weaken trust between these two massive, major, and very good allies. So that particularly it's important because right now the world is becoming more competitive with each other. Now, if you take China, it's growing its influence massively. BRICS continues expanding. Global competition is increasingly going day by day higher. At the time, many countries are forming a new partnership, and some analysts worry that fighting major economies battle allies could create a long-term strategic problems for the United States. And there's also another risk that doesn't get enough attention. If American companies face more barriers abroad, they may eventually lose market shares, and of course the dollar value will go down. Technology companies depend on international growth. Many of their customers live outside of the United States. So if foreign governments create more restrictions or regulations in response to the trade disputes, those companies could face challenges expanding globally. So here the things will get nasty. And when America's largest companies face slower growth, that can affect jobs, investment, and tax revenue back in the home. Now, let me talk about the political side, what effect it's going to take. So Trump has always argued that previous administration allowed the countries to take advantage of the United States. That's what he claims that. But let's take a look at this. So his supporters often like his willingness to confront foreign governments directly face to face and very strict. They see this protecting American interests. But on the other hand, his critics, however, argue that aggressive trade policies can backfire and end up hurting American consumers and businesses instantly. So this debate is not really about something new what's happening. It's a part of the larger argument how America should compete in the global economy. So it should use the tariff aggressively, or should it focus more on negotiations and cooperations with Europe? So that argument has been going in for years and years with Europe. But the difference now is that stakes are getting larger and larger. So we are talking about some of the biggest companies in the world, some of America's closest ally, that is European Union, and potentially hundreds of billions of dollars in trades with European Union. So what's the conclusion in the end? So the biggest danger isn't about tariffs threats itself. The biggest danger is escalation between these two countries on the tariffs. If both sides continue rising pressure on each other, they start as dispute over digital taxes could become a much broader economic conflict between the United States and European Union. So that could mean higher prices, more uncertainty between these two continents, and slower investments, greater tension between major allies, and that will not be good, and potentially weaker economic growth between European Union and also United States. But on the other hand, Trump supporters will argue for sure a strong pressure is necessary to protect American companies, but they don't understand the bad side. His critics will also argue the cost would eventually overweigh the benefits. So what happens will next depends on whether both sides decide to negotiate or whether this turns into a full-scale trade fight. Because if Europe and the United States move from threats to actual economic retaliation, the effect won't stay in the government offices anymore. It will affect the normal people. They could eventually be probably felt by the businesses, workers, consumers, and financial markets from the both sides of Atlantic, in the United States and even in European Union. So that's why this story is much bigger than just the tax. It's about the future relationship, the world's largest two powers, European Union and United States of America. So let me know in the comments below, what do you think, what really Donald Trump wants to do? Is it right that he's want to impose 100% tariffs, or probably what Europe is doing, charging some amount of tariffs on the digital tax on the American companies? And for more, you can subscribe and stay up to date, because we deliver some important updates every single day. Just if you